Ruxandra, round two. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. This is very exciting. I'm very happy that you invited me for the second time. I had a great time last time. We got to talk about a lot of things.
Yeah, that's the hope with every guest is that there's always a round two. That's how you know if it went well. It's like, oh, let's do it again. So I appreciate you coming back on. And I do want to say, since we're now recording, we don't just talk on the podcast. There's a lot of off podcast communication. A lot of work that's been done that I wanted to briefly highlight in between the last episode we did and the episode we're doing right now. You have been commissioned much more recently. You're doing work with Old Sovereign Publishing. Your prints are for sale. Your platform has grown, which is just utterly fantastic. There's been a lot of crossover with a lot of the guests on the podcast, a lot of mutuals that we have that have crossed over and have done work together, which is huge. And I'm always thrilled to see that. You recently got your PhD, which I wanted to cover. And I wanted to cover that partly because the topic of the conversation today is what is an expert? What is a public intellectual? Now that we have these platforms that are growing, that are gaining notoriety, that are being noticed by more and more people, there is, I think, an intrinsic responsibility that comes with that we are orienting ourselves properly. And in the United States right now, and I had sent you some of the links to some of kind of what's been happening, there's a lot of confusion, I think, and controversy as to what makes an expert and what makes somebody qualified to talk about certain topics. The big one that happened fairly recently within the last couple months, he's not really a news host. How do I describe him? The journalist, quote unquote, Tucker Carlson had on a historian, again, quote unquote historian, who essentially parroted a narrative of the 20th century that juxtaposed Winston Churchill as the villain and Adolf Hitler as not necessarily a hero, but a sort of misunderstood world leader. That caught a lot of attention. There's a lot of world events that are happening with a lot of people commenting on that. There's a lot of noise, and there is an inability, it seems, to filter through genuinely good thinkers versus charlatans. And the reason I brought up your PhD earlier, you have a PhD in geoscience.
Geoscience. It's geoscience, yeah.
And yet the topics that we're covering are not around that. My training is in music. You have recently become an artist, and I say recently, relatively.
No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah, and the topics we're covering hit a broad range of subjects that go outside of our, let's say, credentialism. And I want to first learn about your PhD experience, but then I want to get into systematic thinking and then public intellectualism and expertise.
These are very important topics. I hope I will not disappoint. Of course, I have a lot of thoughts. Some things have been subject of a lot of thinking on my behalf for many years now. Although I think I've been very good at keeping myself in a cave in the sense that I purposefully try to be ignorant of certain things that I cannot change. They're not in my proximity, and they can only, they can only be emotionally and nervously erosive. So I'm trying to have this mental hygiene as much as I can. And also, I think I've been very late, just to make a small parenthesis, in finding out what wokeism is. Actually, it was only maybe just before the pandemic, it actually clicked. Wow, this is a big, huge issue. And a lot of the things that are happening, it's very important to also mention that you can get a very specific and strong impression of how the world operates if you spend a lot of time on X, or mostly X. But if you read posts on social media, generally speaking, obviously, you know about echo chambers. People react. That's probably the main problem. People react. Everybody reacts. You know, you get triggered, and this is being exploited and is used as a weapon, and it perpetuates issues and it inflates them. And people are very gregarious. That's one of our core characteristics as human beings. We're very gregarious. We tend to follow each other a lot. We cannot exist isolated from a community. we operate at our optimum with people around us, with relationships. That's the most defining aspect of our existence, relationships. And of course, that has a positive and a negative aspect to it. And it really depends on what connections we make. And this is very important, not only in looking at society as a whole, but connections in science. And this is something that I've been studying for 5 years diligently, how to make connections between elements of a system. And looking at the world as a connected system, there's nothing really isolated on Earth. There's no isolated system that operates completely removed from its outside context. So everything is connected to something else, be it a weak connection or a stronger connection, depending on proximity. And the proximity issue is now the problem, because all of the global issues have become very close to us because we're exposed to them on a daily basis, and we're overwhelmed with an immense amount of information. But what part of that information is relevant? That's something that we have to answer, but most of us answer uncritically. We're not really discerning about that, and we're very poor and bad, and we're very bad at selecting what is actually relevant and what is true. So I think the big data problem is us being overloaded with information that is irrelevant, with things that are actually false, and we gradually lose our capacity to discern things, and we lose our capacity to even interpret the reality that is around us in our proximity. So I know that's kind of the bigger picture, but this is how I see things. And my PhD was quite an experience. I think it was an adventure. It was like a small, not really small. It was an Odyssey for me. I was.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry
Please
to interrupt.
interrupt
Can
me.
we actually spend some time? Yeah. Can we start with the PhD? What was that like for, especially for people who are not in academia? Can you just describe the experience of what it was like to achieve something like a research degree, a PhD?
Yes. So first of all, please interrupt me whenever you want, because I might go on a tangent and it's very annoying. And just please interrupt me. I think the PhD is an incredible, incredible experience. And it's not an experience that you probably associated with, I don't know, you're being a nerd in a lab and you're just doing the same thing every single day. I think it's a test of character. It's like an ultra marathon, especially if you have a PhD in STEM. So it's not only a scientific achievement at the end of the day, but it also feels like I made this. I climbed this mountain. I built a will of iron. I went against the wave, because you're constantly experiencing friction with your peers, with your professors. Sometimes it can be very smooth. It can be a very smooth process. So I really recommend going through a PhD if you really love what you're doing and if you have a good plan. So I started the PhD because I had a lot of data, and I had a lot of, let's say, legacy data from people before me, and nobody was using it. And I thought, okay, this sounds like a good purpose to have. It feels kind of honorable. You know, I'm just continuing the work of people that I always honored and respected. And so nowadays, a PhD program usually lasts for 3 years, which is, I think, quite ridiculous unless you've done a lot of work before the PhD. So you've been preparing for at least 2 years before the PhD to be able to do the PhD in 3 years, especially in STEM, I would say, because you work with a lot of field data. You have to go to a lab, you have to get results, you have to interpret them, categorize data. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of small steps, and you have to have this patience to go through each step of the way and be willing to change the things that you're most attached to. And in the end, it's kind of a pruning process where you have to, okay, I have to quit this, and I have to quit this. And it's the process of removing that. It's the very last sprint, you know, in your PhD. So mine took about 5 years, also because of my professor. It's also because it was a highly debated topic. I had a lot of different opinions. So usually you have kind of 3 + 5 years. That's kind of, you can add 2 more years. In some cases, you can even prolong it. You can prolong your contract. Technically speaking, I don't know how it is in some universities. I managed to be accepted for the PhD program and I also got a scholarship. So I got money for my PhD. It was like paid work. And that was very helpful, of course. It also allowed me to have more freedom to invest time in what I was actually writing about. And if you have more specific questions about it, please ask me. I don't know if I'm answering the question according to expectation.
No, of course, and I think that's it's helpful for people to understand why something like a PhD is difficult, and also, if I might be so bold to say, not everybody is qualified for a PhD. In the United States, it's a little bit trickier. I don't know how it is across the pond, so to speak, but one of the issues that I continuously run into is this issue of credentialism, where somebody will earn a PhD in, let's say, not as reputable subject as something like geoscience, and they'll say, well, yes, Ruxandra, because I have a PhD, therefore I am qualified to comment on fill in the blank. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes the PhD is well earned, and the person who wields that degree is incredibly intelligent and able to parse through issues in a way that the average layman is unable. On the other hand, there is the crowd of PhD baristas who claim expertise, who should not have a PhD. They should not be able to call themselves
Absolutely.
doctor, fill in the blank, because of the way that they also parse through information poorly. And this leads to the broader question. I'll ask it in an antagonistic way to make it spicy. Why are you qualified to talk about something like art and postmodernism and theology and philosophy in a way that makes you credible? Your degree is in geoscience. Why are you, or I'll be less antagonistic. Why are we qualified to work through some of the issues that we're working through? Why should people listen to us?
Well, it's very interesting because you can have validation through a degree, and you can have a validation by knowing facts or being capable of actually performing. So, for instance, in the field of the arts, it's easy to discern, am I good or am I not good? Because you see, especially if you're a traditional artist, that's a whole different thing. I see art as a vocation, of course. I also feel the same about science in a sense. But we have to have, I would put it like this, in the, let's say, original etymological meaning of the word genetic, we have to have a genetic understanding of what is a qualification. So if we go back, for instance, to the Middle Ages or to the early stages of, let's say, the institutionalized education, that was obviously an initiative of the church. Universities are an invention of the Christian church. Your qualification is determined by your good deeds, in a sense. Are you able to perform and to produce good work that is evaluated by certain people who already have proven that they know and they master the subject? Now, whether there is a paper, a formal paper, or no, that is kind of irrelevant if we look at the objectivity of the fact. Can you perform this task or not? Obviously, I am for the institutionalized education in principle. There's a different issue, the fact that they are corrupted, and we have a lot of problems right now. But the fact that you're able to go through, I passed exams. I had the discipline to learn and study, and I had the discipline to present myself in front of an exam. I had the discipline to work on a particular subject for 5 years straight, and I was able to test my results. And that's, for instance, in science. I'm able to reproduce that thing. If you read my thesis, if you read my hypothesis, and you yourself use that framework to test something else, it still works, and you're going to get the results that I forecast. This is what validates a scientific research. If you are not able to replicate it, if you use the same data as I'm using, if you're using the same hypothesis, the same theory that I apply, and you get different results, then there's something deeply wrong with my work. So the ability to repeatability, is a foundational principle in the validation of the scientific process. That's a key aspect. Now, when it comes to theology, that's a little bit tricky. Some things are self-evident, some things they require a lot of discernment and there's a long talk. But for instance, in art, because it's an easier example, because I'm a traditional artist, if someone like, I don't know, Joshua Jacobo, who is my friend, he's the founder of New Masters Academy. This is an online platform for traditional artistic education, art education. If he looks at my drawing, he's going to be able to tell, okay, you understand anatomy or you don't understand this part of anatomy. Your drawing is flawed, because we look at art as founded on craftsmanship and like scientific knowledge of certain principles, optics, which includes perspective, light and shadow, how shapes behave in space, how they respond to light depending on their texture, and obviously anatomy, human anatomy and animal anatomy. And these are scientific things. You can measure them, you can look at them and be able to cast a judgment whether that particular piece of work is good or not. Also, the composition of thing, it's a lot of theory. You develop an eye. Also, in regards to theology and history, well, I see that these as foundational fields of knowledge. For instance, I grew up, ever since I was in school, I thought that you should know your history, at least your own history. That's almost like you know your language and you know your history and you know your geography. At least the basis. These are things that are, I don't know, they're part of your existence as a citizen, as an individual in a particular cultural context where you're born. And I feel like you're taking away from your heritage and your identity if you don't know these things. It's almost like embarrassing. Obviously, I don't know history that well, but at least I have to know kind of the main events, what led to the present day. And obviously, you can always prove whether I'm right or not. And I'm going to go back. I'm talking a little bit too much right now. I'm going to go back to the systems thinking. Am I consistent with reason? Am I consistent with logic? And am I consistent with the body of work, the historical sources, and ultimately the Bible from a theological point of view? Am I consistent with these things? Am I consistent with my own worldview? And you can look at myself and look at how my opinions about things and see where's the coherence here, and do they correlate with real world things that we also know? So you're gonna have to have this comparative approach. You have to also accept the fact that it's difficult. It's not easy. I can't give you an easy answer. For some things it's easy, for some things it's really complicated. And you yourself have to be really prepared in order to cast a judgment. So in order for you to decide whether I'm wrong or right, you have to have your own level of knowledge, and that's
developed thinking.
Yeah. Exactly.
One of the reasons I've been thinking about this this question of what makes someone a public intellectual, in my conversation with Andrew Sandlin, this was an episode that happened a little while back, he said something that I thought was just absolutely correct. It was public intellectuals, it's not just the knowledge, and when I say knowledge, I mean facts. It's not just the facts that you accumulate, but it is the way that you synthesize that information.
Exactly.
And juxtaposing that with a lot of the, let's say, modern public intellectuals, like the most famous example would probably be someone like Jordan Peterson and his art conference. And I've been thinking a lot about this, why this has been rubbing me the wrong way. With someone like Dr. Peterson, and actually, let me, before I continue, because I don't want to sound like I'm just, wielding a sledgehammer. That's not my intention. The work that he's done with his books, Maps of Meaning, 12 Rules for Life, and Beyond Order, I thought was excellent. I really appreciate the work that he did in the psychological field, the work that he did in especially America to help a lot of young men who were lost and had failed to take on the mantle of responsibility, essentially. I thought that the work he did in that was excellent. But recently, a lot of the talks that he's given, a lot of the lectures have been delving into theology and Christianity specifically. And I'm going to say something that no one's going to like, or maybe you will, but I don't think anyone who's listening is going to appreciate this. Dr. Peterson is a postmodern adjacent thinker. And here's what I mean by that. And I'm going somewhere with this as it relates to public intellectuals. Because one of the things that you had said earlier was that the way systematic thinking works is that it has to be tied to reality. And as Christians, we understand that ultimate truth comes from God and is revealed not only in the natural world, but through Scripture. And anything that we say that is not true, we pray withers and dies. And anything that we say that is true ultimately doesn't belong to us because it's simply an acknowledgement of that which already is. With someone like, and Dr. Peterson is not a exception to this. I think about, again, all great men who've done tremendous work, but like a Douglas Murray, so some of the thinkers in the ARC conference, it's something like the narrative we are putting forward is a narrative of invitation and of rejuvenation. And then you might say, okay, well, what does that look like? Well, it's an invitation to do great things. Oh, great. What does that look like? Well, it begins with an invitation to, I'd say, et cetera, et cetera. And if you really push people on this, it's like, what is the foundation for where you are approaching this? There isn't a good answer. And it quickly you see that the thinking falls apart. And why? Because it's not ultimately ensconced in truth beyond the self. And there is, again, where others have walked, we can now run. We do ride on the shoulders of giants who have come before us. But as I said if you'll remember, what I said in the episode with David Benica was that most philosophy, especially in the 19th and 20th century,
that was an excellent episode. I was so excited to listen to it.
Well, it's 1,001 ways to be wrong in interesting directions. And there's a responsibility for this next generation of public intellectuals to come forward and say, not only do we believe that there is such a thing as truth, but we believe that there is a thing called truth that exists beyond the self, and it's tied to goodness and beauty, and it is part of the overarching meta-narrative that we all participate in, culminating at the highest point with, in the Christian worldview, God. Now, actually, before I continue, do you have any thoughts on that? Is there anything you disagree with or anything you'd like to nuance from what I've said?
No, not at all. Not at all so far. I think
okay.
the logical flow is perfect.
Okay. Now, with that said, as we have a new generation of public intellectuals rising, wrestling through credentialism and I agree with you, by the way. One thing I wanted to come back to, I don't want to sound like I'm anti-institution. I teach at a college. I don't want to, I appreciate the institution of a university and what that means. And I do believe that it can be revitalized. In the now, however, in the current present that we have, with the corruption of academics and institutions, how is it that we can deal with this issue of, and I want to go back to this because this is the thing that gets thrown around a lot, credentialism. How do we deal with this issue of, this person is qualified to do PhD work but doesn't have a PhD? Do we listen to this person? Something like this. I want to wrestle with that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I can't give you a straightforward answer because it's not a linear problem. It's a very complex issue, and it has different facets and it has different causes. Like every complex problem has a lot of causes, and you have to address every single cause in order to figure out a solution. How do we get to this point? The problem is it's the fact that we live in a hyper-specialized world. That's kind of a truistic statement. We hyper-specialize, we create new jobs, and we think that these jobs, they require a higher education. There are some technical jobs that don't require a higher education. At the same time, we romanticize higher education in a bad way, to the point that everybody has to have higher education, everybody has to go to university, because otherwise we're stupid or something like that. And then we have these self-deprecating inner talk. I want to be smart too, I don't want to be the stupid person. I don't want to build a house. I don't want to work with my hands, which is absolutely stupid to think like that. It's ridiculous. And there's another issue that universities, a lot of the universities act like businesses. So if you act like a business, your main focus is getting more clients and becoming lucrative. And the more money you have, the more money you can actually reinvest in your research and the projects, which is a good thing. But at some point, it's like communism, it can work. It can be all nice and bliss in the beginning, but it just reaches the peak, the point of no return, after which obviously entropy starts to become active. So too many people had access to university studies. That has overlapped with the postmodernist cancerous thinking that we need to kill the idea of God in humanities, and I think humanities is like a core issue. Humanities and social sciences, these are the core, like the cancerous point of the university life, I would say. And all of these issues combined together, we have a lot of people who get university degrees because we're hyper specialized. We get to do less. We get to learn more of the overall picture. We have less and less complex things to study. Less is required from us. And then more people get to study like postgraduate, get a master's degree, and then more people get to have PhD degree. And that obviously leads to a lot of problems. I see this a lot because I'm a reviewer. I work for a science journal. It's quite a prestigious science journal. I can actually say it's for Springer Nature. I'm not going to name the exact journal because it's the largest publishing company, I think, right now. And I get a lot of papers that I have to review. And I can definitely see the fact that, especially in the last six years that I noticed, a lot of papers are just nonsense. They just repeat the same things. They just send you a report. They repeat the same method over and over again. And when it becomes too stale or too sterile, the language, they come up with fancy philosophical language and fields like, I don't know, hydraulics, underground hydrology, geology, and nonsensical things. And you see that, as you said, it's form without substance. Because you also have that quota. The whole system is in such a way, is built in such a way that requires a lot more quantity to the detriment of quality, of course. And that's why you get a lot of PhDs that are, I don't know, olfactory politics, and probably people recognize that olfactory politics in like 19th century literature or something like that, write a PhDs for 3 years. And I'm struggling here with, I'm not going to compare because you have to go through a lot of frustrations. You look to the left and you look to the right and you see these people kind of moving at a much higher pace, much higher cadence than you, and go ahead of you and get these amazing jobs, and you're just struggling in the lab or on the field with the 404 gathering data from remote places, which I have done. But it's all of these things. I'm sorry if I was a little bit too scattered, but it's all of these things that have led to what's going on today.
Let me ask you something. This thought just occurred to me. Outside of STEM, should the PhD be considered a legitimate degree? And the reason I asked that partly, and I don't think I'm going to do it at this point. Now that my work is picked up, and I don't think that there's a good reason to do it. But I was offered to pursue a PhD at a college studying music theory, which in my view, sorry to say to all the music theorists out there, is kind of a ridiculous degree. And I understand why research in, again, the STEM fields makes complete sense. But I see people who have PhDs in, for example, philosophy, which to my mind is majoring in bunk thought masquerading as a research degree. That doesn't seem, and I'm not trying to denigrate people who work really hard and become quite knowledgeable and good at synthesizing information, but I don't also see the relevance of having a PhD to commemorate that. I'll give you an example. My grandfather, Jack Carter, is probably the greatest scholar I've ever met. He reads, he doesn't speak Greek fully fluently, but he reads ancient Greek easily. His library,
Amazing.
I think he has over 15,000 books. I bring that up because he recently gifted me some that I'm going to pass on to my son, which I'm really excited to go through that with him. The information he has is a treasure trove. It's a vault that he's I've joked before. He's probably forgotten more than I'll ever know, which is just a compliment to the life's work he has dedicated to the subjects of the ancients and theology and all of these things. Doesn't have a PhD. In my mind, probably very qualified in today's academic setting to have a PhD. And we mentioned David Benica. Shout out to David. I think that he's easily, he could easily write a book on Eliad, and it would be
Yeah.
great. Does he need a PhD for that in order for that to be qualified? I don't think so. But I'm curious as to what you think about that. If PhD degrees outside of STEM should be considered even remotely relevant.
My short and straightforward answer would be definitely yes. Definitely yes. For disciplines such as history, absolutely. Philosophy in the traditional historical sense, absolutely yes. I have this hierarchy of scientific disciplines, and I always refer to it. To me, like, if you look at, I don't know how to visualize it best, but the main thing is theology. That's the queen of all sciences. From theology, philosophy should stem. So how we have a worldview that is Christian, but how do we interpret specific instances of reality? And it's a science that deals with the immaterial, and that's very important. STEM only deals with the material, but the immaterial is even more important than the material, I would argue. And I could talk a little bit about it because I wrote about it in my PhD thesis, because it had a philosophical component that was very disputed and misunderstood. But luckily, I would have loved to share the diagram because I made this big diagram, but I'm not allowed to because it was accepted for publishing, but it's not yet published, so I'm not allowed to show it publicly. So it's theology, philosophy, and then other sciences. And I think you need philosophy because philosophy embodies also the field of logics, argumentation, rhetorics. All of these things stem from your thinking, your framework of operating with the real world in your mind. This is very important because science, you don't just operate with facts and science. Like, facts don't really speak for themselves unless you put them in the proper context and you make connections between them. You know, if you see a rock in the middle of a field, that rock is not going to tell you that is a metamorphic rock it was formed at, I don't know, 2000 degrees Celsius at, like, I don't know how many kilometers underneath the earth. It doesn't tell you that. The only fact that you have is that there's a rock in the middle of a field that you found. That's the fact. Everything else, it's a historical study, you know, and historical science is the most problematic of all sciences because it's really dependent on a worldview, but it's also very important because we need to understand, like, how we got here, at least in broader terms. So it's very important to have the immaterial as a subject of study, and it's important to have the material. These are both complementary disciplines. So I wrote it in my PhD thesis I had, because to put it in a very short sentence, what I did was I have a system, it's a mountain area that is somewhat isolated. It has some communities that have been rather isolated. A continuous population for maybe at least 1500 years recorded history. Actually, I even read that the sons of Genghis Khan passed through there and camped in the specific town, and you have a hill that is called after the Huns or Tatars. And so I looked at this and I looked, okay, when did the recorded data start about these parameters that I chose? And I look at the evolution in time, and I see there's an upward trend, there's a stochastic trend, there's a descending trend, and I look at small thresholds and look, okay, I see a threshold here, I see another one here, I see another one here. They kind of are synchronous. Are they correlate? What happened there? And so I looked at the whole system, the whole environment from a historical point of view. And I looked at chains of causality, what caused this phenomenon to happen. And when you dissect this simple principle, it's a very simple principle. It's cause and effect. You know, it rains a lot, we have floods. People exploit or explore mineral ore and mineral reserves, and this impacts the environment. There's also certain traditions there, like the pastoral traditions. A lot of these things, when you look at them, they have a worldview behind them. So Like people thought we should treat nature in such and such a way. And what is the cause of the effects onto the natural environment? If you want to go to the very, very core of the issue, it's thoughts and beliefs. Are these material? No, they're not material. But these are the causes of the effects in the environment, the physical world that you see. Because every action is preceded by a thought. And you have to understand that thought. Where does that come from? Why do you have that set of traditions? And you understand them, you see whether there's a sustainability there, whether you can change things, and how can you actually change things. In order to change anything, you have to change people's minds, and that is operating with obviously the immaterial realm of ideas. And another thing is, like, you have the DNA, it's a physical structure, but the DNA is used to code information. It's a three-dimensional structure. It's the most complex thing in the universe. And what is information in the DNA? Because that's what DNA stores, it's information. Is that information physical? No, it's not. It's just the storage system. It's the way the molecules are bound together. But who interprets? Like, you have information once you have a mind that interprets that information. And the more you think about it, the scarier and the more complex it gets. Scary in the sense that, whoa, it's actually such a complex world. Like you dig and dig and dig and dig, and you never find the end to it. So information, both in nature and in our society, is an immaterial thing that is very important to study, if not more important than the actual physical world, because that's what makes things the way they are. And that's the ultimate cause of the effects that we're able to, the tangible effects, so to say. So you take simple principles and you dissect them. Yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
it's the it's the unification of the material with the immaterial. You know, you can understand that there is an immaterial universe by studying the material, and they are linked. And it's important for people to understand that this is why I laugh at many of my merely materialist friends, that there is no such thing beyond the physical. And I always, especially for musicians, and I say that just because that's where I've done a lot of work. Anytime I meet a musician who's a materialist, I just don't understand that relationship that you can
That's so
have with
funny.
art, because I mean fundamentally, these ideas are coming from somewhere that's not material. I mean, they're ideas, literally immaterial. And if you just extend that worldview, you end up back, where the truth is. Are you familiar with Herman Hesse's The Glass Bead game?
I know about it. It's kind of a vague and distant memory right now.
Yeah, it's kind of I'll be honest, it's kind of a difficult book to get through. It's interesting though, and I talked about this a
Not
little
that I
bit
read.
with
I'm just
Arsensi
writing it down.
Haritonov. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It's interesting. It's a fictional, historic examination of this. I'll give you like a really lazy synopsis. It's this game that these people play in this essentially ivory tower, where this game connects to everything in life. It connects to mathematics and
Yeah, it's like a
philosophy
game of
and the
life. Yeah.
sciences. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's this game that they create within this tower that doesn't work as soon as it's applied essentially out into the real world. And with systematic thinking, I don't want people to listen to this and think that we are arbitrarily connecting things that don't connect. Obviously, that
Yes,
there are
absolutely.
distinctive categories that we study, but the thing that we're recognizing is that there are metaphysical patterns that play out across subjects, that play out across life, that play out across reality, that connection of the immaterial with the material. And there are going to be places where they join forces or perhaps dovetail in a way that is noticeable and worth pointing out. This is why this podcast is focused on the arts and humanities, because I don't view them as completely separate subjects. They do have a symbiotic relationship. They're not the same. The study of philosophy is not necessarily the study of, let's say, music, but they do have a relationship that goes together that will play out if you just look a little bit closer. And if there's anything in there you want to nuance or
Yes, I mean,
correct or
when we talk about
elaborate on?
relationships between things, it can be also a relationship of the contraries. You know, is this the contrary to this? Is it the opposite? Like you look at logical relationships, not just like physical connections between things. Um, and yeah, that's why we've abandoned interdisciplinarity somehow, and now we're returning back to it because we find a necessity to see the bigger picture. And that's what we're actually talking about. Look at the bigger picture and things in their proper context. Don't look at them as isolated. You can't study the liver disconnected from the whole body. There's so many, obviously, this like every single organ you have has a center somewhere in the brain and is triggered from, I don't know, the tactile nerves and is connected to so many other organs. And you have to have a good understanding of your body as a whole in order to understand how one organ operates. Just to put it simplistically. So that's what we're talking about when we mention relationships between things. And we're not forcing anything, building bridges where there are no bridges. So I don't know if I talked about this in our previous meeting, but I studied classical Odyssey. It was during the pandemic, and I was really studying art diligently. I was doing that every day, and it was almost like a therapy for me. It was an escape. I don't think I talked about it actually on a podcast before, but 2019, 2020, because it's relevant to the story. I was very ill in 2020. I was very, very ill, and it was pretty bad. I had the worst view of my future. I thought my future is going to be this short, and it's just like every day it's like a final countdown. So I tried to focus on everything I could do. The pandemic started. The doctors could really help me. It's just a very complex issue with an autoimmune background. So I started to focus more on art on a day-to-day basis while I was trying to experiment. Luckily, I studied a lot of biochemistry and I read a lot of medical materials. And so I became my own lab rat and tried to do all sorts of things based on the latest publications. And I actually fixed myself. I'm completely healed now. It's quite incredible. So I started classical Odyssey because I looked at art and also my life as an odyssey. It's like an exploration to the unknown. And I had this daily, let's say, routine. I would wake up, I would read my Bible, I would read something from the early church fathers. I read a lot from John Chrysostom. And I think it's one of my favorite church fathers. I had this aim to read everything that is left from him, which is a huge endeavor. And then obviously I would work as I had a job, and then at night, not to think about how I felt, I would just draw and study and just look up any resource I could find online. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna start kind of a project and call it Classical Odyssey because it's an odyssey for me, and I'm also pursuing, for lack of a better word, classical art, but it's more like traditional art. So it's not like a business or anything. It's kind of my own personal project. Like all the work that I do, the body of work is under this umbrella of a classical Odyssey mindset. And if you saw, like on my profile, I have Philippians 8, which is a very known Bible verse. That encourages Christians to pursue whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely and admirable, anything excellent or praiseworthy. And I thought, if your mind is focused on these things, I think your body will follow and everything will fall into place in your life, because it just requires so much more discipline to think about the truth and the good, rather than thinking about the possibilities of evil, not just the evil that exists around you, but the possibility of it happening and becoming worse and worse. So to me, classical Odyssey is deeply, deeply Christian. the substance of classical Odyssey is deeply Christian, is rooted in Christ, because Christ is the source of beauty. And everything that is beautiful because it's ordained by Christ. And if it's ordained by Christ, it's also universal. And people, even if they were not Christian, they found kind of the formula of the ideal beauty. So we find ideal beauty in a lot of parameters. It's not something that you can measure. You can put in one exhaustive definition. So beauty is like, when I talk about systems, you have to think about beauty from a system of reference. Does it point out to all these qualities: nobility, nobility of the soul, nobility of the mind, righteousness, purity, loveliness, things that are admirable, things that we aspire to. So to me, like, the more I worked on classical Odyssey, the more it became about apologetics, because there's a Christian substance in every single piece of work that I do. And I know that people notice that, because I talk with a lot of my followers, and sometimes I'm really moved because they write to me. I feel like it makes me think about eternity. And when something is beautiful, it does make you think. Hopefully, I will get to the stage where I'm going to be a good artist. But at least I'm pointing out to something, and I'm pointing out to something that makes people think about, this is very beautiful. This must have been so beautiful. Or the heroic acts of people. And when you think about, why do we like Greek mythology? And I could talk a lot about it, Greek mythology and its connection, how the Mediterranean world was prepared for the gospel, actually, because I see an interesting and natural preparation that God ordained for the world before the gospel was shared. Works of art, the high arts, be it music, sculpture, or visual arts, painting, they're beautiful because they're moving. And it can be something about I don't know, battle in antiquity, during the Roman Republic. And it just makes you think, wow, heroic people existed. They sacrificed everything. When you think about sacrifice, you think about loss. And you think about loss, and then you think about the finitude of things. And you think, no. The soul, at least, cannot be finite. It cannot be like that, because it's your own nature that screams, no, you're not made to be mortal. If you look inside your own soul and you're completely honest with yourself, the main problem of humanity is death. There's nothing else but this. And it's the fear of death that makes people act in a certain way, or the arrogance of denying the fear of death and acting in complete dissonance to themselves. So that's a root of a lot of evils. And you see also the culture today. It's a culture that celebrates death in a really diabolical way. It's almost like you promote death, therefore you feel like you kind of conquer death. So you put yourself at the center of your own universe. And that's one of the historical problems of sciences and arts, that when you start to see yourself as a human being, or you see man as a generic universal statement, humanity, I mean, as the measure of all things, the man is the measure of all things. It's a ancient philosophical statement. Then you're going to go in circles, because as we talked about, truth cannot be accessed with our mind because we're limited, and to try to have, I don't know, to access the ultimate absolute truth with our limited minds, with our limited capacity, when we have no influence over our birth, our death, the moment of our birth, the moment of our death, the length of our life, the country where we're born, we have no influence about these things, but we want to know everything about the universe, where it came from, when it's going to end. Then we're just going in circle. This is just circular reasoning, and we're going to be in a endless, vicious circle. And the vice being your own, just the prideful thinking that you are the measure of your own world. So ultimately, I think classical Odyssey, it's about apologetics, and I'm using ancient light motives, and I'm also using Christian leitmotif, from German, the repetitive patterns and archetypes. And the reason is because I grew up with Greek legends, and I remember when I was small, my dad would read me before bedtime. He would read me from, we had these really beautiful books about the Greek heroes and the Greek gods, and then the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I remember my dad telling me, "Wow, think about this name, it has such a beautiful resonance." And it was kind of drilled in my mind. And I remember I had this, and please interrupt me because I might go on a small tangent here.
No, please keep going. This is great.
Odyssey, I also refer to the Homeric Odyssey too, because I remember in 2020, I was reading a lot just to get through what I was going through because it was horrible. The whole symptoms and just day by day life was just, I don't even want to remember. Actually, I can't even remember. I don't have it in my active memory. I have to think very hard how it used to be. I went through the Odyssey again. And I remember I went out for a walk and I was really weak and I was thinking about the Odyssey. Why do we look up to these beautiful legends and they're still relevant to us? Why did the Apostle Paul use the analogy of a soldier? You know, if you think about the soldier there, it's actually the soldier from the classical world, the Greek Roman soldier, when you have the panoply of Christ. You have the analogy for the athlete and the soldier, which are archetypes that are from antiquity. So he obviously used images that reverberated in the ancient world, and people, I know what you mean. I read the Odyssey and I thought, wow, actually life is an Odyssey in a sense. And that spirit of adventure, you should have it as a Christian, because that's what Paul asks you to do. That's how Paul's mindset was when he went on the voyage. Like the book of Acts to me is the actual true Odyssey. This is the Odyssey, sharing the gospel. And you see all these stops, it's almost like the Odyssey of Homer in some faint way was kind of a prefiguration of Paul's voyage around the Mediterranean basin and how the gospel was shared to the world. So it was a very subtle thought. It's very, very hard to describe, but I have that understanding life is an adventure. You have to face death in order to be alive. As Jesus said, if you wish to save your life, you will lose it. If you lose your life, you will gain it. So it's exactly the same mindset that I understood. This is what it means to be heroic. That's what God calls you to be. That's how you should be as a Christian. You should face it with a lot of courage. And that's actually the foundation of classical Odyssey. This is how it started. And I post a lot about historical Christianity, and I like to reference a lot from patristic, which I read a lot, because I often say, we learn apologetics. We have very sophisticated arguments nowadays because we have like scientific apologetics, not just historical, theological apologetics. But when we read the sophistication, the refinement of thought, the complexity of building an argument with elegance and aesthetics in the first century of Christianity, you don't find any equivalent today. I can't find an equivalent of the past centuries, 2-3 centuries. I think I might exaggerate a little bit. But as a whole body of work, if you think about Basil the Great, John Chrysostom, Gregory of Nazianz, all these big names, it's such a sophisticated level of intellectual endeavor that it has no equivalent. And if you read these things, a lot of the questions that we have today, goodness, they've been answered 2,000 years ago. Like you just keep repeating, and you see these, especially like Reddit atheists and ex-atheists.
Yeah.
I found this the ultimate argument. You guys are stupid. Now I know that you're wrong. And it's just something that was answered over and over and over again for 2 millennia, with different nuances over and over again. And
there's something forgive me for interrupting. There's something
No, sure.
I want to highlight that I want to make sure everybody remembers. And the thing I really appreciate about what you said and what you said about your platform is that life is an adventure. I commented recently, not on Classical Odyssey, but on a different issue, that if you want an epic life, by definition, it can't be an easy life. Like we were talking about in the segment of the conversation that won't air, the currency of life is suffering and sacrifice, and anything great that can be achieved must be achieved using that currency. And that message is littered throughout Scripture. And then the other thing that you had said that I wanted to highlight, this idea that our souls rage against the fact that we are mortal on this side of glory, so to speak. We do recognize that death is not natural. Fundamentally, death is ridiculously unnatural. There's a famous, internet famous YouTube atheist named Alex O'Connor, who makes good content. I'm not knocking the fact that he makes good content, but one of the challenges that he had put forward that I thought was quite ridiculous, and he was challenging Christians as to whether they actually had faith in the soul transcending the body after we die. And I understand that, as a side tangent, yes, we understand that eventually we will have new bodies, the new creation. Okay. But putting that to the side for a second, the challenge he had offered up was that if you have a friend who is going on the expedition to Mars, and you know that when that rocket ship leaves the orbit and they go to Mars, that you will never see them again. That feeling of loss, is that, and sadness, is that the same as if they're going up in that same rocket ship and it explodes in midair? And obviously the answer is no. It's very different when we know that somebody has died versus we won't see them again for a long time. Well, why is that? Well, because again, we understand that death is a violation. Death is not natural. In the story of Jesus resurrecting Lazarus, when Christ finds out that Lazarus has died, he weeps. And that's so bizarre on a first reading, because he knows he's going to resurrect him. He knows he's going to see him again, or I say resurrect, resuscitate is probably the better word. But he knows that Lazarus will not stay dead, and yet he still weeps, and yet he still grieves, and yet he's still sad. Well, why? Because death is a terrible thing. It is an evil violation of creation, and that's why we recognize it as that. And I love what you said. The counter to that, obviously, is living that life of adventure, not giving into easy. How do I say this? Not giving into easy creature comforts that sap you of your purpose that every single person has on our classical Odyssey. And segueing from that, I did want to ask you, what is something that you are hoping people, this isn't the ending question, but what is something that you're hoping classical Odyssey as a platform, how do I say this? Oh gosh. Forgive me, I'm out of coffee, and I,
no problem. I can't even guess it. I was trying to think.
Yeah, sleep deprived. I apologize. What is the cultural impact you are hoping comes from classical Odyssey? Well, what do you hope people take away from that platform? How do you hope it impacts people as it continues to grow?
What I'm praying that I'm able to do, first of all, is that, as you see, when I started Classical Odyssey and I went on social media, I actually started X just last year. Yeah, it was early last year, I think. So it's roughly 1.5 years old. But even before that, I made a decision. Okay, if I go public and I put videos online, I'm not gonna rant about things, because if you have the capacity to see the world as it is, obviously you're gonna see, obviously there's a lot of evil, there's a lot of ugliness, there's a lot of death and decay everywhere. And there's also like a worship of death and decay in the modern culture. It is exactly that. So if I keep repeating that, I'm just going to offer the form without the substance. So what you mentioned that in the beginning, I think when we talked, I don't know if it was recorded, but you use these beautiful arguments, but what is the substance? And I'm trying to point out that's beautiful, that exists, it still exists, it's accessible to you. You have so much available. It's at your feet, especially now with the internet. You can access everything pretty much. About the old masters. There's people who follow the old masters. There are people who are building on that foundation still. We just don't hear their voices because we much rather, it's also entertaining to keep talking about the bad things in the world. It's like a constant wheel, the spinning and spinning and spinning. I just want to show the direction. There's truth and there's beauty, and those are rooted in God and His Son, Jesus Christ. And the whole history is in His hands. And if we see something beautiful in history, it's because it resonates to to the eternal realm. It reminds us of the eternal realm. It points us to, yes, there has to be a truth. There has to be an absolute truth. At least ask yourself that question. So that's the ultimate purpose of everything that I do. I want to remind people, forget about the evil. You have to do something about it. The battle is you creating, not you analyzing the evil. And over analyzing evil doesn't lead you anywhere. Yes, there's a fallen, sinful human nature. Evil is actually really banal, and I could talk about this ad infinitum because it's so banal. Like you have Stalins and Hitlers literally walking down the street. They just don't have the opportunity to do what Stalin and Hitler did. Had they had the power, they would probably do the same things. It's more common than you actually think, and it's actually terrifying if you overthink it. But yeah, it's if you don't have a metaphysical lens to the world, then I think it's very normal that a lot of people have depression and anxiety because you have eyes to see. You see the injustice, you see the death, the pain, the suffering in this world. If you focus on them, it's the worst that you can possibly be in. But there is hope because there is a God, and you have this natural law in you. Your conscience tells you that there must be something beyond you. Just the pure fact that you can ask yourself that question is a miracle. And as Ecclesiastes 3:11, like God put the thought of infinity in our hearts. Just the fact that your limited, finite mind and brain is capable of conceiving the idea of something that is infinite and eternal, just the concept itself of eternity. That is a miracle. How did that get there? Because everything else, apart from the concept of God and eternity, has an equivalent in your empirical experience of the world, like your senses. You touch, you see, you smell, you hear. But how do you see God? How do you get the concept of eternity when you look around? Yeah, you can see the sky is big, but it could also be like a box, just the idea of conceptualizing something that is infinite. It's something that evolutionary biology will never find an answer to because it only operates with finitude, and death in a sense. So I think I went on a long tangent, but I think I did answer somewhat.
Yes, yes, and just one more thing to highlight because this is something that I appreciate about um, you, but not only you, but the community that we run in is that it's as I've said probably too many times at this point, but I'll say it again anyway. Criticism is easy. It's very easy to sit and do essentially this sort of armchair quarterbacking, sports reference, I know, armchair quarterbacking uh, criticism, sitting on the sidelines and saying, why isn't anybody changing anything? The antidote to that is actually putting out work that is positive and beautiful. I like, and this is a callback to the episode that we did, I guess a few months ago, but beauty is a requirement in art. So putting out
Absolutely,
beauty
yeah.
in art that positively affects people will help change the culture. And we've seen a lot of that post that episode, which I really appreciate. And it's been so cool to see this community growing and continuously doing that. There's been a lot of, as I said at the beginning, a lot of big cultural wins. We don't have time to get into all of them right now, but there's a lot of huge events on the horizon that we can all be excited for that are reclaiming Western civilization and reorienting it rather in the direction that it needs to. The last question I always ask, and you've covered a lot of this, but it's worth asking: what is something practical from this conversation that you would like people to take away?
There's um,
I
there's
love
a lot
catching
of
people
things
off
that I
guard
think.
with this question.
Yeah, I know. Because one thing that I was just thinking, because while you were talking, I was just thinking about how we started the conversation, and because me and you, we talked about what's going on, and there's this affinity towards extremist political movements, and there's this segregation that is increasing, and we see it on social media. Obviously, the echo chamber phenomena is always there, but any extremist regime or ideology or anything is by nature anti-intellectual. And I really want to encourage people to be very careful with what they're reading, what they're seeing, because Actually, before we talked about this, I read a little bit because I wanted to remind myself of the aesthetic weapons of the Nazis, for instance, because Nazis, they were a very, people will contradict this, but the National Socialist movement wasn't, I mean, it wouldn't have happened unless Germany would have been prepared for it. And the way they prepared the people is by promoting this anti-intellectual, image-focused strategy of reaching out to people. So they discarded everything that had to do with like deep intellectual pursuit, reasoning, conscious logic, and they appeal to what is the grand ideas, Nuremberg, it's the big castle. We have these larger than life heroic figures, and Hitler is it's like a embodiment of all these mythological figures in Germany, and we have to appeal to these images. And they had these, every speech of Hitler was surrounded by a huge display of power, and we see that also in like communist countries, these huge parades. And it's very important to know that the word is the foundation of everything. You have to go back to the word, and more specifically the written word. All these extremist leaders, all these ideologies were spread like wildfire because people were impressed by the image and by the oration of the person, because they not only transmitted a message, but they put emotion and an image of themselves. So they created themselves, they presented themselves as idols. The written word is the most important thing. The Bible is the most important thing, because when you read, your brain first decodes the message, and it's the first filter that you have is your mind, and you decode the message, then you interpret it and you think about it. But when you see an image or you hear a sound, you actually react with your emotions first, and then you react with your reason. So that's secondary. So be very careful with these things. Just pursue the refinement of your mind, do extensive reading, and do not use your opinions. Do not make your opinions into dogma, personal dogma. Your opinion is not a dogma. The only dogma you should have is your worldview. Believe in God, read the Bible, believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. That's the absolute truth. And if you don't believe that, I mean, it's your duty to search that which is the absolute truth in this lifetime, because you're not going to have a second chance. Don't be intellectually lazy. It sounds a little bit harsh, but invest in your mind, and be careful with the hygiene of your mind. Pursue the things that are of substance, because evil has no substance. So I think that's something I would like to conclude with.
That's well said. That puts a nice bow on everything that we've talked about. Bravo. That's a great way to end it. Ruxandra, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to this ongoing dialogue. Hopefully, next time we reconvene and do another episode, there will be even more beautiful and cultural wins to talk about and to celebrate. And we continue to celebrate now with all the positive things that are happening. So
Yes.
I thank you again for your time. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you, David.